Bolivia, in the heart of Latin America, is, along with Paraguay, the only two countries on the American continent with no access to the sea. The population is multi-ethnic, and the Bolivian constitution recognizes no less than 37 official languages. Most of the country's ethnic groups consider the land as sacred. La Pachamama, literally Mother Earth, is an important concept here. And in this context, the government enacted a law in 2012 which is unique in the world, the Mother Earth Law, according the same rights to nature as human beings and animals. The setting is therefore ideal for nature's keepers in Bolivia, who watch over a Pachamama with 1,000 faces. Mariana Escobar sails on the Amazon to study a species emblematic of these regions, the river dolphin. For many decades, Luis Aguirre has specialized in the study of bats. This fascinating universe includes 132 species living in Bolivia, including fruit-eating, insect-eating, nectar-eating, or even vampire bats. The landscapes of the Altiplano would not be complete without these elegant flamingos. They are threatened, however, by pollution. Omar Rocha evaluates the imminent danger and is trying to improve the situation before it's too late. We're in the province of Santa Cruz in the east of the country, a few kilometers from the Brazilian border and the gateway to the Amazon. The tropical climate of this region is the ideal habitat for the Yacaré caiman. Alfonso Llobet is a biologist specializing in the study of crocodiles. Today, he is going to the north of the region, near a river which he hasn't studied before. On his way, Alfonso wants to get a first impression alongside a lagoon. Despite the fact that the road is just opposite, caimans live here. It's a good sign.
We've just found our first caimans. They're yacarés, and they're between 1 and 2 years old. There's definitely more than one female that made her nest here, because the animals we're looking at are not from the same brood. There are animals that are not yet a year old, and other larger ones that must be in their second year. Baby yacaré caimans begin to feed on insects and small fish, although they also provide food for other predators. Over there, there's an egret feeding on baby caimans. It's one of the main predators of different species of caiman. It might be a good sign, which could give us an idea of what we'll see later when we're on the Rio Negro.
5 species of caiman live in Bolivia, although 4 of them are endangered and almost extinct. In the early 20th century, hunting crocodiles for commercial reasons was rampant. Some species, like the black caiman, which can grow up to 6 meters in length, became popular targets. These large species were hunted until they were nearly extinct. The smaller-sized yacaré caiman took advantage of these conditions to proliferate, and today it's the most numerous species in Bolivia.
En cuanto a las diferentes especies, hemos generado diferente tipo de información.
We have different types of information for different species. The greatest amount of data we've gathered on a national scale deals with the yacaré caiman, and yet we still don't know enough about what happens in the areas where they live. We need more information, and it's important for us to collect it. We want to gradually consolidate a large database that the authorities can use in making their decisions, so that local players can support the protection plans.
According to the local inhabitants, it takes 2 hours to reach the Rio Negro area that Alfonso wants to study, although in Bolivia, everything is relative.
We've got to put branches under the wheels.
Esto es lo que nunca se enseña en las clases
This
de
is the
biología.
part that they don't teach us in biology class.
Quedarse no es una
Staying here is not an option. We've got to get there.
Encontrar caimán yacaré es relativamente
Finding
fácil.
Yacarés caimans is fairly easy. The problem is not finding them, but reaching the areas where they are.
Nuestro país, las condiciones de
In our
acceso
country, the conditions for access and the logistics for reaching certain zones is a bit complicated.
y siempre tenemos
We have
que
to
invertir
constantly
mucho
make enormous
esfuerzo
efforts
para
to obtain
poder
useful
cubrir ese
information
gran
for
vacío de
evaluating the
información que
state of
tenemos sobre el
conservation
estado
of
de
our
conservación
species.
de nuestras especies. Ok, demos una vuelta.
Tracking crocodiles takes place at night, and there are only a few hours left until sunset. Before each work session, Alfonso traces the route in the daytime in order to spot the dangerous and difficult passages that can't be seen at night.
Ya hemos visto 6 o 7 animales.
We've already spotted 6 or 7 medium-sized individuals during the day, which is a good sign for tonight. At night, we can make a more precise estimation. At night, we can make a more precise estimation. It's easier to spot the animals at night with the reflection from our flashlights in their eyes. During the day, they can hide under the vegetation, and it's really hard to see them. Can you get close to those plants, Don Corpus?
As they row in silence, the tracking begins. The boat glides slowly with the current, and with his flashlight, Alfonso looks for the first yellow spots in the night. The light's reflection in the caiman's eyes is very powerful and can be seen from 100 meters away. The light blinds the animals, and so they can't sense the boat coming closer as long as it remains silent.
Caimanes 1, nosotros 0.
Caimans 1, us 0.
Aquí tenemos un grupo de 3 pequeños animales.
Here we have a group of 3 small individuals.
Estos son animales
They're
que han
very
nacido este
small.
año.
They're caimans that were born this year. They remain together because their nest is probably nearby.
Probablemente cerca de aquí estaba el nido. Y el animal
The larger animal we saw earlier is certainly the mother who protects her young.
Cuidado de las crías. En general, el caimán yacaré es
The yacaré caiman generally has a good rate of reproduction. The females lay between 25 and 30 eggs. That's the sound the babies make to call their parents. It's a little sound like this.
La especie, el caimán yacaré,
Yacaré caimans have this sort of small horn above the eyelid. They also have a small protuberance between the 2 eyes, like an eyeglass stem.
como lentes entre los 2 ojos. Y en el yacaré,
Yacarés also have these spots on the lower
manchas en la
mandible.
mandíbula inferior.
They
Estos
can
animales
defend
desde que son
themselves at a
pequeños
very young
van a
age.
intentar defenderse. ¿Ves?
You see? It bites.
Por eso cuando nosotros manipulamos
When we manipulate a medium-sized animal, we have to be very careful because once a caiman bites, it doesn't let go. The only thing to do is wait until the muscles of its jaw relax.
relaje un poco la musculatura de la mandíbula.
There we go.
Eso. Chao, chao. Esa es parte del instinto de las crías.
It's instinctive for the babies to leave the water because that's where their predators are. On the other hand, the larger animals, when they escape, they jump into the water. It's highly improbable that all the individuals will survive their first year. If 20 are born, a maximum of 4 or 5 will make it through their first year. The rest will die. It's eat or be eaten. They're simply part of a food chain.
En las redes tróficas de la naturaleza. Ok, es nuestro.
Great, we've got him.
Ya, alúmbrame. Lo tengo.
I've got him, you see?
¿Ves?
The first thing we do is shut its mouth to avoid our getting hurt and the animal as well.
Nos lastimamos nosotros y evitar que se lastime él también.
Go on, go on. There. We'll do it like this. We've got to try and hurt the animal as little as possible.
Okay.
Okay, that's good. Now to calm the animal down, we'll try to cover its eyes with another piece of adhesive tape. In that way, it won't be conscious of what's happening and it won't react.
Agarra la cola.
Grab its tail so it can't turn over.
Okay.
Okay. Pull to the tip of the tail, and I'll put it at the tip of the mouth. 118. Back paws and extremities complete. Front paws and extremities complete too.
También está completa hasta el final.
This animal is lucky because most caimans lose part of their tail when they're bitten off by predatory fish. When the caimans are small, piranhas very often bite off a piece of the paw or the tail. Now we'll try to determine the animal's sex. To know if it's a male or female, I very carefully put my pinky into this hole to see if there's a penis. You see? It's a male. We can therefore conclude that it's a juvenile male because the 1.2-meter male hasn't reached adulthood. Now we're going to tag it. If we come back to do research on this river, we'll be able to see how much it's grown and whether or not it's changed sectors. There, it's got an ID now. And we've left it enough slack so it can continue to grow. We've gone 8 kilometers. How many individuals have you noted?
25.
That makes 2 or 3 animals per kilometer of river. It's not a huge population, but it's not too small for this type of habitat. I don't think that in a river like this one we'll find more yacares. It's very possible that there are marshes or lagoons in the zones liable to flooding around this river, where the number of animals is higher. Be that as it may, it's another area where we can gather the information that's really missing in the country.
Poco a poco llenando los vacíos que tenemos en el país.
After midnight, the temperature goes down much faster, and the caimans have a tendency to remain hidden. It's time for Alfonso and his team to leave. The province of Santa Cruz is crisscrossed by the muddy rivers and wild, untamed tributaries of the huge Brazilian Amazon. But the tropical forests and their landscapes are victims of a still more problematic phenomenon. Santa Cruz is the country's main agricultural region, supplying 45% of national production. The original forest, with its complex and rich biodiversity, has been devastated to make way for farming, thus endangering a great many different species. Mariana Escobar is a biologist specializing in the study of a very particular animal species, the river dolphin. Bolivia has its own endemic species, the Inia boliviensis. For more than 3 years, Mariana has been sailing on the province's rivers to observe and determine the state of conservation of these pink dolphins. Today, she has to cover an area of about 50 kilometers.
Observation. I note the GPS coordinates to memorize their localization. I count the number of individuals I see. I also note the distance from where I saw the first animal and the distance between the two riverbanks to determine the width of the river. These data serve to better understand the dolphin's habits, if they prefer the center of the river or the banks, so as to define a bit better the manner in which they use their habitat. Genetic studies have determined that the species of river dolphin present in Bolivia is different from other species found in the Orinoco or the Amazon. A geographical barrier isolated this dolphin, which is recognized today as an endemic Bolivian species.
Although dolphins are associated with the ocean, the river variety is their distant cousin. The tectonic plates that form the continents have been moving since the dawn of time. In South America, during ancient and forgotten eras, the continent that exists today was submerged by ocean. Then, when it rose up out of the water, certain marine species found themselves trapped in the rivers. The pink dolphins developed over thousands of years by adapting to their environment.
The rivers are narrower and shallower, with many branches in the water. And so, one of the organic adaptations was that their cervical vertebrae are not joined. They can move rapidly in front of branches or tree trunks at the bottom of the river. Their pectoral fins are large enough to enable them to make sharp turns and to change direction in a matter of seconds. They're not as acrobatic as sea dolphins, and the groups they form are smaller.
The latest estimations place the population of pink dolphins at 5,000 over a 1,600 square kilometre surface of river. Their habitat, however, is severely threatened. Deforestation, which is increasing at a frightening rate, has considerably augmented sedimentation. The riverbank's natural erosion adds a great deal of earth into the water. Although the roots of the trees slowed down this process, intensive agriculture in certain sectors where there are no trees have greatly speeded up this erosion. These rivers loaded with mud are very dynamic. The main waterway is often surrounded by numerous arms which open and close, inundating or drying up depending on the season and the rainfall. In 2010, the mouth of the Pilas River, a tributary of the Rio Grande, was completely obstructed by a 3-meter thick sediment over a width of 300 meters. Thinking that the river was a peaceful spot to give birth, a group of dolphins found themselves trapped. In May 2010, local inhabitants alerted the government about this tragic situation. Action had to be taken quickly since the dry season was just beginning and the Pilas River was undeniably going to dry up.
Making the decision to get them out of there wasn't an easy one, since it meant physically manipulating them, and they're very heavy. And outside of the water, they're very vulnerable aquatic animals. The rescue operation lasted 10 days with the participation of 10 biologists and representatives of the government present as well. A team of first aid workers and members of the YPFB gave us all the logistic assistance we needed.
YPFB is a Bolivian oil company that spared no expense during the rescue operation. Mariana found herself at the head of a group of 50 people. After 3 months of study to define the precise methodology for manipulating the dolphins and the ideal site to release them, the rescue could begin. Some of the dolphins weigh about 180 kilograms, and so the task is far from easy. 3 females are about to give birth. The animals have to be transported by road over a 2-kilometer trail, then taken a few kilometers further by boat to the chosen site where they can be safely released. First aid volunteers come to the region, and gradually the rescue operation attracts everyone's attention. The local and international press covers the event. The initial goal of saving about 15 dolphins ends up with 26 individuals, including 5 babies, being rescued. All of them will survive this unique operation in the history of Bolivia. In 2012, the government declared the river dolphin a Bolivian national treasure. The species has since become the symbol of nature conservation in the country.
Although not very abundant, the population remains at a satisfactory level. Between 2011 and 2012, the protected areas known as the humid zones of the north were created around a central project dedicated to river dolphins, which is in essence a priority conservation space. The river dolphin has a very large distribution area, which means that the more we protect it, the more we protect our natural spaces. We'll be protecting the surrounding rivers and forests. We constantly evaluate how to maintain these dolphin populations over time.
The repercussions of this extraordinary rescue mission seem to have been positive. Protected areas created in 2012 forbid hunting and the unauthorized cutting of wood, meaning 500,000 additional hectares and a few years respite for the flora, the fauna, and the river dolphins that live here. Bolivia's landscapes and ecosystems are as varied as the country's ethnic groups. In the northern province of Chipari, one has to climb a number of passes at an altitude of more than 4,000 meters to penetrate the moist forests. The ecosystems here are bustling with animal life. It's also the habitat of a number of bat species. Luis Aguirre is a biologist impassioned by these creatures whose primary role in the ecosystem often goes unrecognized. He and his team are in the Carrasco National Park. Stretched over a side of the Cordillera des Andes, the park's altitude varies between 280 and 4,700 meters. It's also one of the rare sites in Bolivia with natural caves, a privileged habitat for certain species of bat.
There are very few caves in Bolivia. Our geological system doesn't include large caverns like those in Colombia, Paraguay, or Mexico. These are very unique since they're an important refuge for a great number of bats living in the region. Here we have a group of Platyrrhinus bats. They're bats that feed on fruit. They're also very important spreaders of seeds in tropical forests. This is a small harem of a male and several females. This bat here is scratching herself, which is part of her grooming. Bats, in fact, are very clean animals, contrary to what most people think. We'll go a little further into the cave to see if there are any other bats here.
There are about 1,300 known bat species in the world. 360 live in South America, and 132 of them exist in Bolivia. Their diets are different according to the species. Some are fruit-eating and contribute greatly to tree reproduction since they spread the seeds of the fruit they consume. Others feed on insects, and still others eat the nectar of flowers and thus participate in their pollinization. But of these 1,300 species, only 3 have the diet which has given all bat species a bad reputation: vampire bats, which feed on the blood of their prey.
When you enter a cave and you see this oily-looking substance, it's in fact the feces of vampire bats. Those of fruit or insect-eating bats consist of the remains of fruit or insects. Here you have what looks like oil. Actually, it's the blood that vampire bats consume.
The common vampire, the most widespread species, has been seen in this cave very often. Luis continues on slowly and silently, since this particular species is known to be extremely fierce. Suddenly, his flashlight comes across a group of vampires, but to his great surprise, it's not the species he expected to find.
The group we have here is a group of hairy-legged vampire bats, which is a very rare species and an endangered one as well. It's considered vulnerable because they're not very numerous and because they depend on caves like this one to live. You can very seldom observe them. They're really incredible, but not at all fierce. Generally, they live alone or in couples, but here they've formed a group of about 40 or 50. That's really strange. You almost never see them in such a large group. I was expecting another species, and I came across this one. This vampire, contrary to the common vampire, feeds on the blood of birds.
Se alimenta de la sangre de aves.
It's an incredible bat. The specialization and the development they've undergone is fantastic.
The vampire bat's incisors are especially adapted to cut through flesh. They attack sleeping prey, gently sliding over to them before biting. Their saliva contains draculin, an anticoagulant substance which prevents the wound from closing up, allowing the blood to flow until the predator's thirst is quenched. On occasion, a vampire bat will attack cattle, and even though these species are few in number compared to all the others, people tend to group all bats together as animals that should be exterminated.
To get rid of bats, people light fires in the caves. They burn tires to smoke the bats out. In Latin America, we've determined that one of the most important threats to their survival is the destruction of the caves in which they live. The absence of bats would greatly deteriorate nature, since many plants depend on them for their regeneration, their biology, and their reproduction. Bats are key elements of ecosystems because they intervene on different levels of the food chain. They're both primary and secondary consumers, since they feed on plants and insects. An 8 to 10 gram bat, for example, can eat between 600 and 800 mosquitoes in an hour. Bats are therefore excellent and natural regulators, preventing insect invasions. Bats fulfill a very vital function in our ecosystems.
Just a few kilometers from the cave, there's another research site used by Luis and his team. This abandoned hotel, in the process of being restored, has become a refuge for thousands of bats. Through this new project, Luis is trying to determine to what degree an artificial habitat can respond to the needs of bats compared to a natural habitat. It's not easy to catch a bat, although one of them, in one of the hotel rooms, seems to be very docile.
Anything here? That bat all the way over there is a very special bat. It's a sackwing bat which feeds on insects. There aren't many of them in this sector, and what's interesting is that you don't usually find this species in caves. Abandoned buildings like this one are refuges for this rare species. Have you got it?
Yes, but it's not moving.
Must be half asleep.
I don't know if it's alive.
It seems to be dead.
No, it's alive.
At the moment, it's cold here. That's why this bat went into a dormant state. It's a state of lethargy, like hibernation, but over a short period. I'll open its wings so you can see this sort of small sac, which is typical of the males. With their paws, they collect saliva and urine, which they mix together and then put it into the sac. The liquid ferments and produces a perfume that attracts females. That's why these bats are called sac-wing bats.
murciélagos de sacos alares.
Okay, easy now. Later on or tomorrow, when it's warmer, we'll be able to continue what we're doing. We'll search the rest of the hotel to see if there are any other bat species around.
They're Philostomus.
That's what I thought. In this group, there are easily 100 to 200 bats.
Esta es una colonia de Philostomus muy grande.
It's a very large Philostomus colony perched up there.
Pertenece a esa familia que tiene esta estructura.
They belong to a family with a particular nose structure in the form of a leaf, which gives it its name. Philostomidae means nose in the form of a leaf. We can see that this colony is very old by the droppings on the ground, at least 5 to 10 years old. Covers a gigantic layer. In some places, the guano is so thick that it can be economically useful, since it's a very powerful fertilizer. Contains a great deal of nitrogen and phosphorus, and can be used as an additive for gardening.
Bats are extremely useful on a number of levels. Some tree or plant species are even dependent on them for their reproduction. The agave, a plant used for making tequila, has a flower which only opens at night. The nectar-eating bats are their only pollinizer. It's the same for the balsa. Luis and his team have already identified 7 different species in the abandoned hotel, as opposed to 5 in the Carrasco Park's cave. The artificial structures, therefore, are more effective than the natural habitats. To pursue his research, Luis also has to determine the species which hover around the hotel without living there, those that live in the forest. The best way to find out is to catch one in flight.
We might put a net there. It seems to me to be an ideal spot for a 10-meter net. In addition, there are several plants that use bats like the cecropias over there. There's balsa too, and further on there some pepper plants. It's a very interesting spot.
Is it good and tight?
Yeah, I think so. We generally try to set up the nets in areas where we think that bats will be distracted as they fly, because if we put the nets where bats are active, they'll be very attentive and spot them. Their ultrasound system is extremely effective. The ones who fall into the nets are the distracted ones.
The less clever ones tend to be caught.
That's technically true.
Contrary to what most people think, bats are not blind, although it's not their eyes that guide them. They use ultrasound, analysing the echo of the sounds they emit. In other words, they gauge the duration of the sound that echoes in their ears in order to measure distances. For centuries, scientists have been developing radar systems inspired by this ingenious natural phenomenon.
We'll listen to it at a slower speed. There, that's a typical social chant. A bat's chant has numerous phases, beginning with a searching phase like this. Slowed down, it sounds like this. It's therefore a sound emitted by the bat when it's searching for prey. As soon as it finds something, the bat increases the frequency of its signal. Then when it traps its prey, the frequency becomes faster, which is the moment it consumes its prey.
Y ese es el momento en el que se alimentan o están intentando alimentarse.
We can't hear this type of signal here, which means that although the birds fly here, they don't eat in
Pero no
this
se
sector.
están alimentando en esta zona. Ahora vamos a ver las redes.
Let's check
A
the
ver
nets
si
to see if we caught
hemos
anything.
capturado algo.
We've got two.
Ajá. Tú agarra ese y nosotros vamos a
Take
agarrar
that
este
one and we'll take the big one here.
Un poquito más aquí, pero no
Pull on the nest towards you. There.
Espérate.
Normalmente cuando se enredan como este.
Generally, when they're rolled up like that in the net, they're trying to bite. You have to be careful of two things. First, to make sure it doesn't bite, and second, not to harm the bat, which can happen if you hold it too tight. They could panic and suffocate, so you have to be very careful.
Esperan y no pueden respirar, entonces hay que tener bastante cuidado.
The weight, including the sack, is 100 grams.
Es un adulto.
Age?
It's an adult,
4 milímetros.
80.4 millimeters long.
There's a little insect.
Este es bastante pequeño, pero tiene
It's
alas.
tiny, but it has wings. These insects feed on blood.
Pero
They're parasites. The damage it can do depends on the relationship between the bat and the parasite. Some bats can endure a great number of parasites,
hay murciélagos
while
que
others
pueden
can
aguantar
sometimes
cargas
die
grandes,
as a result of just one.
otros, dependiendo del parásito, con uno solo ya basta.
They can develop an infection, and they also expend a lot of energy by scratching to get rid of the parasite.
Para quitarse el parásito.
Una cosa interesante, los murciélagos.
An interesting thing about bats is that their diet is different depending on the species.
Los que comen frutas, néctar,
They can be frugivores, insectivores, nectar-eating, or vampires. They become study models that respond to ecological questions of a general order. These responses can easily be extrapolated to other groups of animals. Bats are not simply fantastic animals, they're veritable research tools for ecologists.
De investigación muy útiles para los ecólogos.
Sin necesidad de lanzarlos. Simplemente.
Sí.
If one were to sketch a recent portrait of science in Bolivia, the Altiplano would be the background. At an altitude of 4,000 meters, it has a very particular ecosystem. The climate is arid, and temperature variations are huge. During the winter, the difference between the glacial nights and the sunny days can reach 50 degrees Celsius, with night readings of -25 and day temperatures of +25. In spite of these extreme conditions, the flamingos are part of the Altiplano's picture postcard. They flee the cold and choose the lakes linking Pupo and Uru to spend the harshest part of the winter. The climate is a bit milder, and the lake barely freezes over at night. There is a fairly abundant amount of information on the Altiplano's 3 species of flamingo. Omar Rocha, a biologist devoted to these animals for more than 20 years, is one of the main suppliers of this information. He and his team have come to spend another day of observation on the bank of the lake.
There's an interesting group we can inventory over there.
Poder censar. A ver. Sí, podemos empezar.
We'll start counting them from there and go up to here.
Continuamos haciendo el conteo hasta acá y luego otro punto por ese sector.
Tengo 750 andinos,
I've counted 750 Andean flamingos,
290
240 James flamingos,
James.
and 87 Chilean flamingos.
Vi otro anillado.
I've spotted one with a tag.
Ahorita
I'll
vamos
try
a
to
verificar
identify
el
it.
código.
LTZL.
It's a juvenile.
Otro
Yeah, I've got another one. JAJH.
JH.
We're checking the tags on their paws. They'll enable us to determine where they come from, as well as their ages. For the moment, we found 3 individuals from Salar de Surire in Chile. It's a technique we use to follow the flamingos' movements. We share the data between the 4 countries covering their distribution: Argentina, Bolivia, Chile, and Peru.
Although the 3 flamingo species can live peacefully together, they don't have the same food preferences. They do, however, use the same feeding technique of plunging their heads into the silt and filling their beaks with water and mud. The interior of the beak is made up of a huge number of blades, which serve as filters, leaving only invertebrate aquatic species, which are the base of the flamingo's diet. The water they constantly ingest, however, is a threat to their health in the long run.
The primary danger to lakes Pupo and Uru Uru is the pollution resulting from untreated wastewater from neighboring cities. This untreated water goes directly into the lake and deeply affects the biodiversity of these aquatic ecosystems. Another important threat is undoubtedly the mining activity taking place around these same 2 lakes. We've identified more than 100 mining concessions that have had a powerful impact on the aquatic ecosystems. Look.
A corpse.
The body's still fresh. I think the flamingo must have died last night. The causes could be natural, like the cold or an illness, but it's more probable that water contamination is the real cause. We'll take it with us and conduct some examinations to determine the cause of death.
Omar has recently launched a new research project on the lake. For several months, he and his team will collect all the corpses it can find in order to measure precisely the impact of pollution on the health of the flamingos.
The goal of this new project is to determine the rate of heavy metals they have in their blood, in their feathers, and in their bone tissue. Parallel to this, we'll conduct a study to identify certain diseases. This is a juvenile Phoenicopterus chilensis, which I think is 5 months old. One of the characteristics of this species is its residual finger, which you can see here. The other 2 flamingo species in the Altiplano don't have this appendage. We'll take biometric measurements. The beak is 70.8. 40.2. 20.5. Put it in the sack. We'll freeze it and take it to the laboratory for analysis.
One of the strong points of scientists dedicated to the study of flamingos is that they've joined forces by sharing data with neighbouring countries. The Flamingo Conservation Group of the High Plateau, which unites the 4 countries where the animals live, was created in 1996. Chile has been tagging them since 1982. Bolivia began in 2002. Argentina and Peru don't have nesting zones, and the tagging takes place on the newborns before they learn to fly.
Thanks to our tagging programs, we've been able to determine that the flamingo's movements are very widespread. In just a few days, we can find them in the lagoons of neighboring countries more than 1,500 kilometers away as the crow flies. We've also learned more about the characteristics of their habitat and their habitat preferences. In addition, we now have a more precise idea of their area of distribution, and we know the exact sites inhabited by the 3 flamingo species in the Altiplano.
Bolivia is a very dynamic nation in terms of nature conservation. Impassioned, dedicated nature's keepers are constantly on the alert when it comes to protecting the environment of their sacred and beloved Pachamama.